An unprecedented ultimatum has just sent shockwaves through the highest corridors of royal authority, threatening to destabilize the very foundation of the sovereign realm. Behind closed doors, in the dimly lit sanctuary of Clarence House, a dramatic power shift has been set into motion, a silent coup of birthright and betrayal that threatens to fracture the British monarchy forever. Reports emerging from the heart of the palace reveal that the delicate truce between King Charles and his exiled son, Prince Harry, has utterly collapsed. It began not with a public declaration or a clash of state armies, but with a single document, a heavy cream envelope sealed in dark wax, delivered directly to the king without warning. Marked exclusively for the sovereign's eyes, the contents inside were nothing short of a direct assault on crown authority. As King Charles unfurled the thick paper beside the briefing table, those present in the room watched the blood drain from his face. Harry was not seeking an invitation. He was not begging for a supervised reunion or a temporary truce. He was asserting an absolute, inviolable claim, demanding that his royal blood granted him unrestricted, permanent access to the private redoubt of Sandringham estate, effectively demanding that the palace reinstate privileges that Charles had personally stripped away. The atmosphere inside Clarence House turned instantly frigid. Queen Camilla, standing in the shadow of the king's desk, watched her husband's hand freeze halfway through the second page. Her eyes caught the unspoken terror hanging in the air. This was no routine request for a family gathering. It was a hostile challenge to the monarch's supreme command over his own ancestral soil. Unlike Buckingham Palace, Sandringham is not a public state asset governed by Parliament. It is the private, sacred sanctuary of the monarch, passed down through blood, wrapped in the solemn memories of Christmas mornings, royal deaths, and centuries of guarded isolation. To demand unhindered entry into Sandringham was to strike at the sovereign's ultimate boundary. The second page of the letter escalated the siege even further, extending this sweeping mandate to Meghan and their children, demanding that they be permitted to cross the guarded perimeter at will, without ever asking for royal permission again. The tension in the room was suffocating. Charles lowered the pages with a heavy, deliberate slowness, his jaw set in a hard line. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet, terrifying restraint that chilled the room far more than any violent outburst could. His son, the king declared, could not turn his back on royal duty, abandon the sacred obligations of the crown, and then turn around to demand the private sanctuaries reserved exclusively for those who serve it. Yet beneath the king's icy, authoritative front, Camilla saw the agonizing wound of a father betrayed. She also recognized the catastrophic danger. If the king yielded to this ultimatum, the authority of the crown would be irreparably compromised. Across the Atlantic, thousands of miles away in his California stronghold, Prince Harry already felt the shadow of rejection looming over him. In a secretly recorded call with a trusted representative, his voice cracked with raw bitterness as he confessed that the palace's locked gates and bureaucratic procedures did not feel like security measures. They felt like a deliberate, total banishment. To Harry, the palace was using cold paperwork and armed sentries to erase him from his own bloodline, walling him off from the very land where he had walked as a child beside his late mother. But his father answered that rebellion not with words, but with a swift, absolute exercise of sovereign power. Setting his pen beside the cream envelope, King Charles issued a crushing decree to the estate office: deactivate every historic family pass linked to Harry immediately. Then, looking into the eyes of his senior private secretary, the chief architect of sovereign policy, the king commanded the immediate drafting of an unyielding, final refusal. Word of the escalating crisis reached Prince William before midday, sending a jolt of alarm through the heir to the throne. William, standing firm as the unyielding guardian of the monarchy's future, instantly grasped the existential threat. A single concession to his brother would set a catastrophic precedent, a fatal legal weakness that could be weaponized to dismantle royal authority for generations to come. Yet, just as the palace legal machine prepared to seal the door shut forever, an aide unearthed a forgotten relic from the past, an earlier written promise that Harry believed changed everything. The battle line was no longer merely about stone gates and estate keys. It had transformed into a war over whether a reigning sovereign could revoke a solemn word once given to his own son. For the public, Sandringham was an idyllic portrait of royal heritage, a sprawling winter estate wrapped in pine forests, Christmas traditions, and carefully managed appearances. But for King Charles and Prince Harry, it carried something far more dangerous: memory. Every corner of the private redoubt seemed to hold the haunting shadow of a family that had once gathered without lawyers, security negotiations, or formal written permission. Now, that very sanctuary had transformed into a psychological battleground, forcing both men to decide whether home was inherited by birth or lost through broken trust. Charles saw Sandringham as one of the last places on earth where he could exist beyond the suffocating weight of state ceremony. The sovereign still desperately needed somewhere to be a father, a husband, and a grandfather, without every private breath becoming ammunition in a public war. After years of explosive interviews, tell-all books, and intimate family grievances broadcast to millions, the king feared that granting unrestricted access would destroy the fleeting privacy that remained. To him, the heavy iron gates protected far more than historic land. They protected fragile relatives and loyal staff who no longer felt safe speaking freely inside their own home. Harry carried a vastly different, agonizing version of the estate deep within his soul. He remembered cold childhood mornings, long walks across the mist-covered grounds beside William, strained family lunches, and the painful gatherings that preceded his final departure from royal duties. Losing entry did not feel like a routine security adjustment. It felt like a deliberate, cruel attempt to rewrite his history, locking him out of his own past, one door at a time. During a private, recorded conversation with Meghan in California, the Duke confessed the raw humiliation eating away at him. He could not bear the prospect of returning as a guarded outsider, escorted across grounds where he had once roamed without asking anyone's permission. To need official clearance from palace bureaucrats just to visit places bound to his mother, his grandmother, and the life he had lost was a psychological cruelty he refused to accept. Meghan listened carefully, but she challenged his logic. She warned him that demanding standing access could easily be weaponized by the press, making him look like he was attempting to reclaim lost royal privilege rather than preserve personal heritage. But Harry pushed back fiercely, insisting the palace was intentionally defining him as a temporary guest in his own family, a label that would render his exile permanent. Yet Charles's fury concealed an equally deep and agonizing wound. Alone with Queen Camilla after a tense morning briefing, the king confessed that every attempt at reconciliation seemed to arrive burdened with conditions, artificial deadlines, or the covert threat of public fallout. Camilla urged him to hear the genuine pain hidden beneath Harry's formal language. Yet, she also reminded the monarch of the harsh realities of sovereign statecraft. Unrestricted estate access directly impacted staff safety, room security, confidential planning, and family members who lived in constant dread that their private words might end up exposed to the media. Prince William found himself trapped in the quiet agony between childhood memory and future duty. He remembered standing shoulder to shoulder with his brother during past family crises, but he now feared Harry wanted all the intimacy of closeness without offering the silence and trust that closeness required. Pausing outside his father's study, William composed himself, entered, and delivered his unyielding advice. The king's decision had to be firm, lasting, and defensible. It could not look like personal vengeance disguised as policy. Before either man could finalize the ruling, however, the ghost of an earlier humiliation returned to poison the dispute. A dark night when Harry had traveled to Sandringham, faced a locked gate, and realized his childhood home had been closed to him forever. Months prior, Harry's security vehicle had slowed outside a private estate entrance on a freezing evening. He had returned to Britain for a solemn memorial service for the late Queen, hoping to spend one solitary hour at Wood Farm, the modest cottage where Prince Philip spent his final years, a place of personal mourning rather than public ceremony. He had alerted a former household contact, but no written authorization from Charles had been issued. As the car waited, the guard recognized the prince, but the barrier remained down. A palace official stepped up to the window and delivered a cold sentence Harry would remember word for word. Without the king's personal written authorization, he could not proceed. For 10 agonizing minutes, Harry sat trapped in the vehicle as the gate stayed closed. He dialed the king's office directly, demanding immediate authorization. An aide answered instead, repeating that the sovereign was completely unavailable and that all visits must strictly follow formal channels. The refusal cut deeper than anyone at the gate understood. Even grief now required bureaucratic permission. When Charles learned of the incident later, he reacted with anger, telling Camilla that Harry had arrived unannounced, placing guards under extreme emotional pressure. William, too, became part of the wound. Though he denied ordering the gate shut, he refused to defend spontaneous visits, convincing Harry that his brother had silently engineered his exclusion. Sadness hardened into purpose. Reopening an old private letter, containing a promise that Sandringham would always remain a family welcome, Harry weaponized the phrase as a sacred vow. Discovering this, King Charles abandoned all thoughts of a quiet written refusal and ordered an immediate, direct video showdown. An unprecedented digital confrontation flickered to life across thousands of miles, linking a shadow-draped study in Clarence House with an isolated room in California. Neither man smiled. The atmosphere between father and son was thick with a suffocating, unbearable stillness. King Charles sat behind his broad desk, the disputed letter resting directly beneath his hands, his posture rigid with the solemn gravity of a monarch facing a rebellion. Opposite him on the screen, Prince Harry appeared with squared shoulders and a dark, unyielding gaze. For several haunting seconds, no words were spoken. Only the quiet, heavy breathing of two men caught in the gears of destiny echoed through the line. Then, without a single word of preamble or warmth, the king lifted the envelope, looked squarely into his son's eyes, and delivered the sentence that stripped away every legal pretense. "Are you asking to visit your family, or are you claiming a right over my home?" The question cut through the room like a razor, dismantling every carefully prepared argument. Harry answered with a quiet, burning anger that had been festering for years. He declared that every attempt at a simple, private family reunion had been systematically transformed by the palace into a cold, militarized operation, managed by aides, constrained by rigid schedules, and guarded by intrusive security checks. He argued with fierce passion that no father should force his son to negotiate through gray-suited officials merely to step foot on the land where his childhood memories were buried. He was not seeking state ceremony or royal deference. He was begging not to be treated as an alien intruder inside his own lineage. But King Charles remained an immovable wall of sovereign power. He reminded Harry that his departure, his grand public declaration of independence, had been his own deliberate choice, and that true independence carried non-negotiable consequences. The monarch warned his son that he could not cast off his royal obligations to the crown while simultaneously demanding the private privileges, sovereign protection, and sacred real estate attached to it. Freedom, the king declared with cold authority, could never work in only one direction. Harry's carefully maintained restraint finally shattered. He accused the king of using the gates of Sandringham as a weapon of quiet humiliation, transforming the private estate into a physical instrument of punishment for everything Harry had exposed to the world. The locked gate at Wood Farm, Harry argued, had spoken far more honestly than any polished palace press release. It proclaimed that he was welcome only if he remained silent, compliant, and completely under palace control. King Charles leaned closer to the camera, his eyes ablaze with royal fury and heartbreak. He reminded Harry that broken trust had catastrophic consequences. Private family conversations had been sold to broadcast networks. Sacred childhood wounds had been printed into memoirs for global consumption. Intimate royal grief had been shipped across oceans to satisfy public curiosity. The king did not deny Harry's emotional pain, but he refused to pretend that such betrayal had left the sanctuary of the family unharmed. Harry pushed back with raw desperation, asking whether the memories of his mother, his grandparents, and his youth now belonged exclusively to working royals. It was then that King Charles slowly removed his glasses, set them deliberately beside the disputed letter, and delivered the devastating line that froze the call into dead silence. "You cannot claim what you walked away from." The silence that followed was suffocating. Harry sat frozen on the screen, his chest heaving, before delivering a low, heartbreaking response that echoed through the king's study. "I walked away from an institution, not from being your son." But the line had been drawn, and the battle shifted instantly from emotional pleading to cold, institutional authority. The call ended without a gesture of warmth or reconciliation. By the following morning, the disputed letter was no longer resting on the king's desk. It had been placed inside a locked red folder and carried into an emergency restricted council chamber. Present in the room were King Charles, Prince William, the estate's senior legal advisor, and the sovereign's private secretary. No public cameras recorded the proceedings. No press briefings were permitted. Yet inside that guarded room, the ultimate fate of the bloodline was codified into policy. Prince William spoke with uncompromising force, cementing the institutional victory. He warned his father that granting Harry a standing, automatic right would be a fatal error, creating a dangerous legal precedent that future rogue members of the royal family could exploit to undermine the authority of the crown. William argued that while personal invitations could be extended out of paternal grace, no independent household could ever dictate terms to the reigning monarch. Though Charles hated seeing his own son reduced to an estate management hazard, he recognized that kindness without boundaries would destroy the very institution he was sworn to protect. Picking up his royal pen, King Charles formally signed the sovereign decree. Prince Harry would hold no automatic inherited right of entry. Every future visit would require advance written approval, strict security vetting, and explicit personal permission from the king. Yet, in a final moment of fatherly grace, Charles added a single handwritten codicil. Urgent personal matters, memorials, and family emergencies would bypass bureaucratic channels and reach the king's desk directly. The legal trap had closed, and the balance of power within the House of Windsor had shifted forever. The morning after the secret decree was signed, a heavy, quiet fatalism settled over the royal houses on both sides of the Atlantic. In California, Prince Harry received the formal ruling in the stillness of dawn. Reading the cold, measured terms beside his kitchen counter, he absorbed the full reality of his defeat. The palace had not merely rejected his demand, it had systematically dismantled his claim to inherited privilege. Future entry to Sandringham would no longer be a birthright born of royal blood, but a restricted clearance granted at the sole discretion of the monarch, contingent on advance security vetting and explicit personal invitations. The private sanctuary of his childhood had officially become foreign territory. Meghan watched him fold the pages in silence, recognizing that the illusion of leverage was gone. She urged restraint, warning that any fresh public outburst would only reinforce the palace's narrative of volatility and security risk. Surrendering to the silence, the Duke realized that his power to challenge the sovereign had vanished, leaving him permanently outside the inner circle of the crown. In London, King Charles felt no sense of triumph in his legal victory. Sitting alone in his sitting room at Clarence House, the monarch stared at the telephone, crushed by the heavy, fatalistic burden of his sovereign responsibilities. He had successfully defended the authority of the crown and preserved the sanctuary of his estate, but the victory was cold and hollow, a legal triumph that cemented the tragic fracture of his family. Prince William, too, carried the unyielding weight of the new reality. Standing as the uncompromising guardian of the monarchy's future, he recognized that securing the throne required hard, unsentimental boundaries. He accepted the reality that public commentary might view the ruling as ruthless banishment, but he bore the psychological burden without apology, knowing that sentimentality without limits would tear the institution apart from within. Weeks later, the new reality was put to the ultimate test. Preparing for a brief journey to Britain, Prince Harry made no threats and dispatched no legal representatives. Stripped of his leverage, he personally contacted King Charles, requesting permission to pay his respects at a private memorial location on the Sandringham grounds. The king granted the request directly, delivering the approval without the intervention of palace aides or gray-suited committees. When Harry's vehicle approached the heavy gates of Sandringham, the iron barriers slowly swung open. But as he passed through the perimeter, the balance of power had permanently shifted. He did not enter as a prince asserting an inviolable birthright. He entered as a guest, receiving a father's grace. The illusion of inherited entitlement had been shattered forever, replaced by the absolute reality of sovereign control. The storm had finally passed,
leaving behind a dark, unbending historical truth that has governed realms for 1,000 years. Royal blood may weave memory and history, but supreme power belongs exclusively to the sovereign holding the crown. In the ruthless theater of historic power shifts, those who walk away from the throne can never dictate terms to the altar. The locked gates of Sandringham stand today as an enduring symbol of an ancient realm where personal desire must ultimately bow to the unforgiving machinery of statecraft. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel as we continue to bring you the hidden truths behind history's greatest power shifts.